is Lillis Taylor with UAB's Arts and Medicine, and today I'm going to be showing you some very basic embroidery stitches that are also great for hand sewing, and also how to thread your needle, how to split your embroidery floss down, how to get started, and then how to tie off your work. So let us look. So what you can see here is on the top row you've got running stitch. Then we have backstitch, which is great for outlining images. Over here I have a design and it's been filled in with satin stitch. And then these little beautiful dots over here are French knots. So we are going to get started. This is a piece of denim. Because it's kind of sturdy, it's easy to work with. In a perfect world, you would have a hoop, an embroidery hoop, but you may not have one, and we're going to actually do this tutorial without one, although I am going to show you how to use it. The other things you will need today are an embroidery needle. Let's see. Yeah, an embroidery needle with a pretty big eye. See if I could even, get in there. Some embroidery floss, and generally embroidery floss has 6 strands, and we're going to show you how to split that apart if you want to, but you can also use all 6 strands. Of course, you'll need some trusty scissors, maybe a paper clip if you don't have an embroidery hoop, and a piece of paper. Ours is celebrating the Alabama Bicentennial. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to show you how to use a hoop even though you may not have one, because you may have one. So it's 2 pieces and you need to unscrew this piece right here, pull these 2 pieces apart, and then the piece with the hardware goes on top of your work. And the other piece goes on the bottom of your hoop, like so. And then the denim is really thick, so you probably don't need to give it many twists, but if you have a thinner material, you would want to give it some more twists to make it nice and tight like a drum. But like I said, we're not using this today, so. Okay. Now, to prepare our fabric, we're actually going to fold this in, and this is where your paper clip is going to come in handy. So you can just paper clip that, and that way it just makes your work kind of a little more wieldy, a little less unwieldy. Okay. So, my spiel when I teach at the hospital is that threading the needle is the hardest part of this activity. Once you get that, you are good to go. And a lot of people ask me, how do I not get a giant wad in my embroidery floss? And I have yet to figure this out. I have been told that when it comes in its packaging, there is a right strand to pull and a wrong one. And somehow I always manage to pull the wrong one. Okay, so you want, let me measure this because this is approximate. Yeah, this is about 30 inches. Maybe that's a little bit too much. We'll make it short this time. So this is about 18 inches of thread, which is about the length from my fingers to my elbow. Okay, so now we need to thread our needle. So we took our piece of paper and we're going to make a little cut, and we're going to take the resulting little strip and fold it in half. And the key here is that this piece of paper needs to slide smoothly through your needle, okay? because this is going to be your threader. So we take that, we know it's going to fit. So now we just put this thread in the little trough, okay? And then we slide that through. See if it's getting a good, and voila, okay? So that is a great trick if you have an eye of a needle that a piece of paper will fit through. Now if you have a teeny tiny eye, then you just have to get really calm and think good thoughts, and then you can get it threaded. Okay, so now we need to make, okay, so the way we do this is we leave a short tail here. We don't double our thread. And then on this long end, I need a double knot. So one way of doing the double knot is just to, make a knot and then make it again. But this is a fancy way of doing it. So you take your needle, and I like to say it's like you're clasping a necklace. Like here's the clasps one side and the other side. Then where the eye is, you go ahead and pinch that with your right hand. Wrap 1, 2, 3 times. Pinch all of that in this hand, and then just either with one hand or the other, you slide that all the way down, and you'll have a little knot on the end. So again, clasp your necklace, take this, wrap it. I wrap it a couple of times, work it over the eye of the needle, and then you have a knot. So you're ready to go. Okay, so short tail and then a double knot on the long end. So we're going to start with running stitch. And basically you always start on the bottom of the fabric. You come up, you go down, you skip a space, and you go back down. So people ask me, how do you keep it in a straight line? Or how do you make sure the spaces and the stitches are all the same length? And I would say that's probably just A, practice, and B, I actually don't worry about it that much. So, of course you could make lines on your fabric if you wanted. Okay, so now I'm going to just go ahead and finish this line. Okay, we're back. So now we've done running stitch, and now we are going to do back stitch. And I have a needle that is now threaded. I've got a shorter tail. Well, I mean, it's a longer tail, but I also have a longer piece of thread because back stitch uses a lot more thread. And on the long end of my thread, I have my knot. And one thing I want to note is this was the remaining piece of thread on my needle from the previous demo. And it's kind of not big enough for me to use for a project, well, for the next project, but sewing enthusiasts call this an ort, and so we're actually going to keep the ort because there are projects we can do with our scraps. Okay, so now it is time to do the back stitch. So again, we come up. Oh, okay, a few things. So what would we use the running stitch for, and what would we use the back stitch for? So a lot of times in my classes at the hospital, I teach how to outline drawings on white fabric. So you could, in ballpoint pen on your piece of fabric, you could write your name, your child's name, your partner's name, or you could, trace your favorite, sports team logo, whatever, your favorite fruit, your favorite animal. And then you could use this backstitch to outline the drawing that you make. And then running stitch is really good. I mean, it's definitely a decorative stitch, but it's really good for doing some sewing that doesn't require like a super super tight and secure seam. So we'll talk about what you can use running stitch for later on, but backstitch it's super secure, so it's definitely something, if you were sewing two pieces of fabric together like a pillow or something, you would want to use running stitch because it's very secure. Okay, sorry, backstitch, you would want to use backstitch because it's very secure. So we're ready to get started. And another thing I didn't mention is that when you are pulling your needle, you need to either hold the threads behind your fingers or hold the needle where it's threaded, because we don't have the thread tied onto the needle. So that's something I always forget to mention. And I'm actually going to show you guys kind of a faster way to do backstitch. So I came up, and you always go forward. So I'm going in, and I'm actually taking a bit of the cloth and coming out. So I went in, and instead of going down and getting my needle from underneath, I just went through the top. So now I'm going to go back into this. That's why it's called backstitch. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I went backwards, but I came out with a space in front. So let's watch that a couple of times. Now, I would say that this is faster, but it's harder to keep a straight line, although this is not really straight and I did it the other way. So I'll show you the other way, because it's a similar stitch. You go backwards into the hole from before, and then you skip ahead and you go backwards into the hole from before. Skip ahead and go backwards into the hole from before. Okay, now I'm going to show you that other way again. So I've got to go backwards, but then I'm just going to come up here. And if you're just practicing these stitches, I would definitely try it this way, because it's harder when you don't have a pattern to follow, like I'm not following anything. But if I were going along a drawing, it would be easier to do this. And if you're using a hoop, it's kind of a little bit easier too. Okay, so we will come back to show you how to tie off once this line is finished. Okay, so now we've finished that, and I'm going to show you how to tie off on the back, because it is different from running stitch. When you have running stitch, you don't really have anywhere when you finish to tie off on the back, but with backstitch, you come backwards towards your stitching, so you actually have these previous stitches. And what I'm going to do is slide under the stitches closest to where the thread was coming out, and guess what? I'm going to leave a loop, grab it, and pull taut. And you're going to do that how many times? 2. Okay, leave a loop, grab it and pull taut. And then cut your thread and admire your work. So next we are going to do some French knots. Okay, we're back to do some French knots, and my little tip for French knots is that they're relatively easy to do. You just need to be really patient with yourself and with the thread. So we are going to love our thread a little bit, which is just giving some of our hand oils to the thread, because that actually helps it run through the material easier. And a little hint, if you've aced the putting the knot on the end of your thread using the needle, then you're going to have luck with French knots. So let's just remind ourselves of that. Clasping the necklace, wrap a couple of times, pinch and hold, and then pull down the length of your thread, and you have a little knot on the end. Okay. So I'm going to show you kind of just using the table, because it'll help me, and you're going to want to use a surface, but then I'll try to do it up close in the air, which might be fun for all of us. Okay, so I'm going to fold up my fabric and use my handy dandy paper clip to get a little bit closer to the workspace. And then I'm going to come up from behind. What does that look like? Okay, it is pretty far. Okay, so come up from behind. And then you are going to pull this thread taut here. Wrap your needle. You can do this, wrap it as many times as you want, but we're going to wrap once and twice. This left hand has to hold this thread taut the whole time. That's the only job it gets. And then the right hand puts the needle back in where you came out of. So I think you can see that. Okay, this hand has to hold this tight or taut. And then, still holding it taut, I'm going to pull this through. Yeah, this is nice and awkward. Okay, pull this through, and see, I went real slow and it made a nice little knot. Okay, let's do that again. Come all the way up. This hand is going to hold this taut. 1, 2, go back in. And see, I can see that that's a little squishy, so I'm going to try to pull it a little bit tighter. And voila. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like if you don't hold it taut. So 1, 2, oops. So, well, for one thing, you can't get your things on there. Okay, 1, 2, not held taut. Just kind of pull it. Okay, so see how there's not a really tight little knot there? That's because we didn't hold it taut. So that is the gist of French knots. You just need to practice them, and then also practice how many wraps you give your needle. Now, of course, if you do like 10 or 20 or something crazy like that, then it does something else. In fact, I believe that's a different stitch. So, and then what would you use these for? Well, they're really for hand embroidery, just kind of embellishments that you can do. You can use them to be eyes if you're creating a little creature. They can be details in a floral arrangement. They're really just embellishment for embroidery. Okay, last but not least, we will be doing the satin stitch. Okay, so now we are going to use satin stitch to fill in this shape right here. And we have been working with 6 strands of thread, but we are now going to split the thread down to 3 strands. Before I do that, I was going to mention that I've been using the paper clip, but some of you may actually have a straight pin around. So of course, you can also use your straight pin to set your work, prepare your work for yourself. And see, I like when my hand, naturally my work just kind of fits into the groove between my thumb and my fingers for the work I'm doing, okay? So to split thread, again, something kind of hard to see. So we need to, I am tapping the ends so that I can get all the little individual pieces apart, okay? And basically you just find one that's by itself, okay? You gently pinch here, and you have to pull straight whoop up, okay? And you get one piece of thread. So what I do is I go ahead and lay that out, and look, this is the resulting thread, so you have to be very careful. You just get it nice and back to itself and come in for another one of these little strands. And you cannot pull it towards you, you cannot pull it away from you. You have to go vertically up, and you have to do one at a time. Okay, so this is actually how most professional embroiderers do their thread. Okay, so we said we wanted 3, so I've got to do one more. And I will tell you that true professionals would then take this remaining strand and peel them individually and put them back together, because they say that just prepares the threads to be in a happy state of mind. And I'm kind of like, you know what, they're fine, they're okay. So if you've gotten this far, congratulations, and definitely start with, you know, a shorter amount of thread if you're getting a giant knot at the beginning. And then how will we ever thread our needle? We're going to put these threads in here. Okay, so we've got our thread in our little threader, and I picked up the wrong needle. Let's not do that. And then go through there. Voila. Leave a short tail. Okay. And I'm just going to show this again. Clasp my necklace, wrap, and pull till I have a knot. Okay. Now, this satin stitch was done inside of the outline stitch. So step 1 of any satin stitch is you have to outline a shape. Once you have done that, you will do satin stitch. So I am going to show you satin stitch that goes on the outside of the outline. This one went on the inside of the outline. And the reason you would ever want to do that is if the outline color is different, or, you know, that's the look you're going for. Okay, so we're going to start. Now, this is just my own preference. I don't know why I do this, but I like to start not at the end of my shape. I like to start in the middle somewhere. So I came up, gonna go across, and then we're stacking the stitches. So I've got to come up right next to that and go across Now, if your stitching gets caught on the edge of your fabric or on any of your devices that are meant to be helping you, please move them. You don't want to get annoyed at anything while you're... This is a soothing, meant to be a soothing activity. So try not to, go too far up or down. Just hug the edge of your outline. And that's pretty much it. So let's get to the end on this side. Okay, so a few things that came to mind while I was going this direction, and I left some spaces for you to see. If you accidentally go too far apart, all you have to do is go back and fill in the gap. And the one thing that worries me about the satin stitch that covers the back stitch, the shape, is that it kind of pulls the fabric in. I don't know if you can see this, but it's pulling the fabric in, which on denim is not really an issue, but if you were working with a lighter fabric, a thinner fabric, it would cause some puckering. So that's something that happens when you're doing satin stitch this way as opposed to putting it inside of the outline. Okay, so now we're going to go to that end and then we're going to tie off. I'll see you back in a second. Okay, we're back. We have finished this other satin stitch and we're going to tie off here in the back. Now here is a great example of, look how short my thread is. It's going to be a great ort. Now I would hold everything in place very carefully. Go ahead and you're going to do what you usually do. Get that loop and then pull. Okay, so today you have learned how to, without an embroidery hoop, do the running stitch, the back stitch, satin stitch, and French knots. Okay, and the last part of this tutorial to me is the most important, and that is needle safety. So whenever I am finished with the project, I just take my needle, or needles in this case, stick them in a piece of fabric, so that I don't lose them. And then of course you can fold your fabric so that it would be hard to hurt yourself. Okay, thank you so much. We are going to be posting lots of different ways in which you can use these this basic stitching tutorial in the coming days and weeks. Happy sewing!